It was supposed to be a routine flight. Passengers were boarding, rolling their suitcases down the narrow aisle, searching for their assigned seats. The hum of conversation filled the cabin, blending with the occasional overhead announcement. Parents settled their children, travelers tucked their bags into the overhead bins, and a flight attendant in a crisp uniform stood near the front, scanning the crowd with a look of quiet authority. Among the passengers was a black family, a mother, father, and their young daughter, no older than 6. They moved carefully down the aisle, their little girl clutching a small stuffed bear, eyes wide with excitement. It was clear this trip meant something to them. Maybe it was their first vacation together in years. Maybe they were heading to see family. Whatever the reason, they carried the kind of energy that made it obvious this flight was more than just a trip. It was a moment. But then, something shifted. The flight attendant's gaze locked onto them. Her expression, once neutral, hardened just slightly. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but the change was there. As the family reached their row and started settling in, the attendant stepped forward, clearing her throat. "Excuse me," she said, her tone clipped. "I need to speak with you." The mother glanced up, confusion flickering across her face. "Is something wrong?" she asked. The attendant's lips pressed into a thin line. "You need to come with me. Now." The father frowned. "Why?" "We just sat down." Other passengers began to take notice, conversations lowering as heads turned toward the unfolding scene. The flight attendant, who had been all smiles just moments ago with other travelers, suddenly seemed rigid, her stance unyielding. "I need you to step off the plane," she repeated, louder this time. A hush fell over the cabin. The mother's grip on her daughter's tiny hand tightened. "Is there a reason?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. "You're being non-compliant," the attendant said briskly, as if that explained everything. The father sat straighter, his face a mix of disbelief and frustration. "Non-compliant? We just sat down." The little girl looked up at her parents, then back at the attendant, her small brows knitting together in confusion. "Mommy, what's happening?" Passengers exchanged glances. A few pulled out their phones, sensing that something wasn't right. Murmurs rippled through the rows, people whispering to one another, trying to make sense of the situation. A woman in a nearby seat leaned forward. "They didn't do anything," she said under her breath, loud enough for those around her to hear. The flight attendant's patience seemed to thin. "I'm not going to ask again," she said. "If you don't come willingly, I'll have security remove you." The mother's breath hitched. The father's jaw clenched. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding anymore. It was something else. Something unspoken, yet heavy. Then, a voice broke through the tension. "Excuse me, but why exactly are you removing them?" A man a few rows back had spoken up, his phone held steadily in front of him, camera recording. Others followed suit, quietly lifting their phones, capturing every second of the escalating exchange. The flight attendant's expression faltered just slightly. "This is an airline matter," she said quickly. "Please remain seated." But it was too late. The moment had shifted. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, calling for a brief delay. A few seconds later, another airline staff member stepped onto the plane, his face set with purpose. Then, in front of everyone, passengers still strapped into their seats, cameras rolling, eyes wide with shock, the flight attendant's world changed in an instant. The tension inside the cabin was thick, pressing down on everyone like a heavy weight. Whispers moved through the rows like a slow wave, passengers exchanging glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The flight attendant stood stiffly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as the airline staff member approached. He was an older man, his uniform neatly pressed, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, a sharpness that suggested he already knew something was wrong. He stopped in front of the family, taking in the sight of the mother clutching her daughter's hand, the father sitting tall but tense. The little girl, still holding her stuffed bear, watched him with wide, questioning eyes. The sight alone seemed to cause a flicker of something across his face, but he kept his voice calm as he turned to the flight attendant. "What's going on here?" he asked. The attendant straightened. "I was removing them from the flight," she said quickly. "They refused to follow instructions." The mother blinked in shock. "That's not true," she said, her voice controlled but firm. "We just sat down. She never gave us any instructions." The staff member turned his gaze back to the flight attendant. "Is that so?" The woman hesitated for half a second. It was almost imperceptible, but those who were watching closely caught it. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but before she could say anything, a passenger a few rows back spoke up. "I've been sitting here the whole time," the man with the phone recording said. "They didn't do anything wrong." Another passenger nodded. "Yeah, she just came over and started telling them to leave." More murmurs spread through the cabin. A woman in the aisle seat leaned forward. "It didn't feel right from the start," she said. "Why were they singled out?" The staff member's eyes darkened just a bit. He exhaled slowly before speaking. "Let's step outside for a moment," he said, looking at the flight attendant. The attendant stiffened. "I was just following protocol," she said quickly, but there was a slight waver in her voice now. "Step outside," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for debate. The silence that followed was thick. Passengers shifted in their seats, watching closely as the flight attendant swallowed hard and, without another word, turned and walked toward the exit. The airline staff member followed, glancing once more at the family before stepping off the plane. The mother let out a slow breath, her fingers still wrapped protectively around her daughter's hand. The father's jaw was tight, his body rigid. He wasn't just frustrated, he was hurt. The little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Are we going home now?" she asked softly. The mother looked down at her daughter, brushing a gentle hand over her curly hair. "I don't know, baby," she said quietly. "I don't know yet." Around them, passengers whispered amongst themselves. A woman in a business suit turned toward the family, offering a sympathetic smile. "That was unfair," she said softly. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that." The father nodded, but he didn't speak. His grip on the armrest was tight, his knuckles pale from the pressure. A few minutes passed. Then, the airline staff member returned, stepping back onto the plane alone. He cleared his throat and turned to face the family. "I want to personally apologize for what just happened," he said, his voice steady but carrying a note of regret. "You are not being removed from this flight. You are welcome to stay in your seats and continue your journey." A wave of relief rippled through the passengers. A few even let out quiet sighs of approval. But the father's expression remained guarded. The mother hesitated before asking, "And what about her?" The staff member's lips pressed into a thin line. He glanced toward the front of the plane, as if weighing his words carefully. Then, finally, he said, "She won't be coming back." A collective murmur spread through the rows. Passengers exchanged glances, some nodding in understanding, others still trying to process everything that had just unfolded. The mother exhaled, but there was still tension in her shoulders. The father sat back slightly, though his grip on the armrest didn't fully relax. The little girl, sensing the shift in the air, looked between her parents. "Are we okay now?" she asked. The mother forced a small smile and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Yes, baby," she said, her voice softer now. "We're okay." But as the airline staff member turned to walk back toward the front, something in his expression suggested that the situation wasn't over just yet. The plane was quiet now, but the tension still hung in the air like an unspoken weight. Conversations had died down, but the unease hadn't left. Some passengers kept glancing toward the front of the plane, as if expecting the flight attendant to return despite what had been said. Others murmured quietly among themselves, shaking their heads, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and discomfort. The mother shifted in her seat, still holding her daughter's hand, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to believe it was over, that they could simply take this flight and move on, but something inside her told her it wasn't that simple. The father sat beside her, his jaw still tight, his hands still clenched. He hadn't spoken much since the airline staff member had left. He was thinking, processing, holding back emotions that had no easy release in a setting like this. Across the aisle, the man who had recorded the incident leaned over slightly. His voice was low, careful. "I got everything on video," he said. "If you need it." The mother turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. There was no hidden agenda there, just quiet solidarity. She gave a small nod. "Thank you." The man nodded back, slipping his phone into his pocket. "It's not right," he said after a pause. "People shouldn't be treated like that." The father finally exhaled. "No," he said, his voice steady but full of weight. "They shouldn't." A few seats back, another woman shook her head. "I can't believe she thought she could get away with that," she whispered to her seatmate. Her friend frowned. "She probably thought no one would say anything. Maybe she's done this before." The thought sent a fresh wave of unease through the cabin. Had this happened before? Had other families, other passengers, been forced off flights for no reason, with no one there to speak up for them? The possibility lingered, unspoken but heavy. The plane remained in a holding pattern, the flight still delayed. People began shifting in their seats, sighing, checking their watches. Some were frustrated by the delay, but most seemed more concerned with what had happened. A few rose up, a flight attendant, one of the remaining crew, moved cautiously down the aisle. She looked nervous, her steps careful, as if she was walking through something fragile. She stopped near the family, hesitating before she spoke. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That shouldn't have happened." The mother studied her for a moment, noting the unease in her eyes. The woman wasn't responsible for what had happened, but she was still a part of this airline, still part of the system that had let it happen. The mother gave a slow nod. "Thank you." The flight attendant glanced around, as if making sure no one else was listening, then leaned in just slightly. "They're still talking about what to do," she said under her breath. "The airline, they're trying to handle this quickly." The father narrowed his eyes. "Handle it how?" The flight attendant hesitated again. "I don't know exactly," she admitted. "But they're concerned." That word lingered. Concerned. Not apologetic. Not outraged. Just concerned. The father looked away, his jaw tightening again. Of course they were concerned. This wasn't just about one flight attendant anymore. This was about the passengers who had seen everything. The phones that had recorded it. The video that could spread beyond this plane, beyond this airport, beyond their control. The flight attendant straightened, giving them one last look before walking away. Minutes passed, and finally, an announcement came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We will be departing shortly. Thank you for your patience." A few sighs of relief rippled through the cabin, but the tension still hadn't fully lifted. The family remained seated, their hands still tight around each other. The plane might be taking off soon, but something told them that this situation was far from over. The plane finally began to taxi down the runway, but the tension inside the cabin was still thick. Conversations were quieter now, but there was an underlying buzz, an unspoken energy that filled the space. The mother glanced at her husband, his face still unreadable, his eyes fixed on the seat in front of him. He hadn't spoken much since the flight attendant left, but his silence said enough. He was waiting, watching, processing every moment. The little girl rested her head against her mother's arm, clutching her stuffed bear tightly. She didn't fully understand what had happened, but she felt it. The shift. The way her parents were holding themselves, the way people around them were acting. She was too young to put words to it, but she knew. As the plane picked up speed, lifting off the ground, the mother exhaled, staring out the window. The city below became smaller and smaller, but the weight in her chest only grew heavier. She wanted to believe that this flight was just another trip, that they could land at their destination, step off, and let this moment become nothing more than a bad memory. But she knew better. A few rows back, the man who had recorded the incident was still watching. He had been scrolling through his phone, replaying the footage over and over, his expression growing more serious each time. He wasn't just holding on to the video, he was thinking about what to do with it. Another passenger, a woman with sharp eyes and a determined expression, leaned over to him. "Are you going to post it?" she asked in a low voice. He hesitated, glancing around before responding. "I don't know yet." She frowned. "People need to see it." "I know," he admitted. "But I also know what happens when things like this go viral." The woman sighed. "Yeah, the airline will try to cover it up." They both knew how these stories went. Damage control. Official statements filled with empty words. Maybe an apology, maybe not. But the real question was, would anything actually change? Near the front of the plane, a flight attendant whispered something to another crew member. Their expressions were tense, their movements quick, as if they were trying not to draw attention. But people were already watching. The father noticed it too. His eyes flickered toward them, then back to his wife. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. Something was still happening. The mother shifted in her seat, her fingers tapping against her knee. She wanted to let it go, to just sit through the flight in silence, but her gut told her that wasn't an option. Another 20 minutes passed, the plane cruising smoothly through the sky. But then, a voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making an unexpected stop. We appreciate your patience." A ripple of confusion spread through the passengers. People glanced at each other, brows furrowed. A stop? That hadn't been part of the plan. The mother's heart began to race. She turned to her husband, his face now sharp with concern. "What does that mean?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "I don't know. But I don't like it." The man with the phone sat up straighter, his fingers tightening around his device. He knew enough to know this wasn't normal. The woman beside him leaned in again. "You think this is about what happened earlier?" He didn't answer, but they both knew the thought had crossed his mind. A few rows ahead, the flight attendants were moving again, their voices hushed. Something was happening, and whatever it wasn't over yet. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder as the unexpected announcement settled over the passengers. Confusion turned to concern. People shifted in their seats, exchanging glances, trying to make sense of what was happening. An unplanned stop? That wasn't normal. And the way the flight attendants were moving, the tension in their faces, the way they kept whispering, made it clear that something wasn't right. The mother tightened her grip on her daughter's small hand. The little girl had dozed off, her stuffed bear tucked under her arm, unaware of the unease building around her. The father, still rigid in his seat, leaned slightly toward his wife. His voice was low but firm. "This isn't a coincidence," he said. She nodded, her throat tight. She knew he was right. The man with the phone had stopped scrolling. His screen was still lit up, paused on the video of the flight attendant confronting the family. He glanced around, then turned to the woman beside him. "You see how they're acting," he whispered. She nodded. "Something's up." More passengers began asking questions. A businessman near the front pressed his call button, his voice edged with impatience as a flight attendant approached. "Excuse me, but what's this unscheduled stop about?" The flight attendant forced a practiced smile, but her fingers gripped the edge of a seat tightly. "We just need to make a quick landing for operational reasons," she said. "Operational reasons?" The businessman raised an eyebrow. "That's vague." "I understand," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I don't have more details at the moment, but the captain will update everyone soon." The businessman exhaled sharply, clearly unsatisfied. The moment the flight attendant turned away, he muttered, "Something's off." The mother's stomach twisted. She turned her gaze to the window, watching the sky stretch endlessly beyond them. Where were they going? Then, another announcement crackled through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent. Please fasten your seatbelts." The mother's pulse quickened. Already? The flight had barely been in the air long enough for a full meal service. This wasn't right. Passengers started whispering again, the unease spreading like wildfire. The father leaned toward his wife once more, his voice even lower this time. "Do you think they're trying to get us off the plane?" The question sent a chill through her. The idea had been in the back of her mind, but hearing him say it made it real. The man with the phone overheard and turned toward them. "If they try anything, people are watching," he said. "They can't just—" A voice interrupted him. Another flight attendant, this time the lead one, had approached their row. Her expression was carefully composed, but her eyes betrayed something deeper: nervousness, hesitation. "Sir, ma'am, we need to have a word with you once we land," she said. The mother felt her breath catch. The father's grip on the armrest tightened. "Why?" he asked, his voice level but edged with steel. "It's just a standard procedure," the flight attendant said quickly. "Nothing to be concerned about." A bitter laugh nearly escaped the mother's lips. Nothing to be concerned about? After everything that had already happened? The man with the phone was still recording. Other passengers had taken notice now, their gazes locked onto the scene unfolding before them. "This is ridiculous," the woman sitting next to the man with the phone muttered. "What are they trying to do?" The flight attendant hesitated under the weight of all the eyes on her. She took a small step back, then turned and walked briskly toward the front of the plane. The mother exhaled shakily. She turned to her husband. "They're not going to stop," she whispered. The plane continued its descent, the landscape below growing clearer. The mother had no idea where they were, but something told her that this landing wasn't going to bring the resolution they needed. If anything, it was only going to make things worse. The plane touched down with a jolt, the sudden impact making the mother's heart pound even harder. Around them, passengers shifted in their seats, whispering in hushed voices. The announcement of an unscheduled landing had put everyone on edge, and now, as the plane taxied down the unfamiliar runway, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The mother squeezed her husband's hand, her pulse racing. The little girl stirred in her seat, blinking sleepily, unaware of the storm unfolding around her. The father exhaled slowly, his muscles tense as he watched the flight attendants moving about the cabin. Their eyes darted nervously toward the front, toward something, or someone, waiting outside. Then, a new voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we complete final arrangements before deplaning." Arrangements? The word sent a chill down the mother's spine. This wasn't a normal stop. This wasn't routine. Through the small window, she caught sight of movement. A group of uniformed personnel stood outside the aircraft, their postures stiff, their expressions unreadable. The man with the phone leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something's about to go down." The flight attendants avoided eye contact as they prepared to open the cabin doors. Then the lead attendant, the same one who had spoken to them before, stepped forward, her voice unervingly calm. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, we need you to exit the plane first." The mother's stomach twisted. The father's grip on her hand tightened. "Why?" he asked sharply. The attendant hesitated, just for a second, before forcing another polite smile. "We just need to clear up a small matter before the flight continues." The murmur of the passengers grew louder. The businessman in the front row frowned. "This doesn't seem right," he muttered. The mother swallowed hard, exchanging a look with her husband. She knew walking off that plane wasn't just about clearing up a small matter. They wanted to isolate them. But before she could speak, another voice cut through the cabin. "Excuse me, but I think we all deserve to know why this family is being singled out." It was the woman sitting beside the man with the phone. Her voice was clear, unwavering. Passengers turned toward her, nodding in agreement. Another voice joined in. "Yeah, why are they the only ones being asked to leave?" The flight attendant's composure faltered. She glanced toward the door, toward the uniformed personnel waiting just beyond it. Then, another unexpected voice rang out. "I think I can answer that." Everyone turned as a man in a suit stepped forward from the front row. His face was serious, his presence commanding. The airline logo on his badge confirmed what many already suspected. He was someone with authority. The lead flight attendant stiffened. "Sir, He raised a hand, silencing her. His gaze then shifted to the family, his expression unreadable. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "First, I want to sincerely apologize for what happened earlier on this flight." The mother's breath caught in her throat. The father remained still, waiting. The man continued. "We have reviewed footage from multiple passengers, and it's clear that you were treated unfairly. That is not the standard we uphold at this airline." A stunned silence filled the cabin. The mother felt her hands tremble. Was this really happening? The man took a deep breath before turning to the lead flight attendant. "You, however," he said, his voice colder now, acted completely out of line. "Not only did you unfairly target this family, but you created unnecessary distress for passengers on this flight." The attendant's face drained of color. "Sir, I was just—" "You are relieved of duty, effective immediately," he said, cutting her off. Gasps rippled through the cabin. The mother's heart pounded in disbelief. The flight attendant's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She turned toward the other crew members for support, but they avoided her gaze. "You'll be escorted off the aircraft," the man continued. "The airline will be conducting a full investigation into your behavior." For a long moment, the flight attendant didn't move. Then, stiffly, she reached for her bag and walked toward the exit. The moment she stepped off the plane, a hush fell over the cabin. Then, slowly, applause began. It started with one person, then another, until the sound filled the space. The mother felt her throat tighten, overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events. The man in the suit turned back to them. "On behalf of the airline, we deeply regret what you've been through. We will be offering you full compensation, including additional accommodations for the inconvenience." The father nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said, though his voice still carried the weight of everything they had endured. The plane was still grounded, but for the first time since the ordeal began, the mother felt like she could finally breathe. The tension had broken, but she knew the impact of this moment wouldn't end here. As they sat back down, the man with the phone leaned over. "This video's going viral," he whispered. The mother exhaled. Maybe it was time people saw the truth. The applause slowly faded, but the energy in the cabin remained charged. Passengers exchanged glances, some still in shock at what had just unfolded. The mother took a deep breath, her fingers still trembling slightly as she reached for a bottle of water. She wasn't sure if it was relief or exhaustion settling in, but she was grateful for the small moment of stillness. The father sat back in his seat, his expression unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders had eased slightly. He was still processing everything. The unexpected confrontation, the flight attendant's dismissal, the public apology. None of it had been what he expected when they first boarded the plane. Their daughter shifted beside them, rubbing her sleepy eyes as she looked around. "Are we there yet?" she asked softly. The mother smiled faintly and brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead. "Not yet, sweetheart. But soon." From across the aisle, the man with the phone leaned forward again. "I just uploaded the video," he whispered. "It's already getting traction." The mother hesitated. Are you sure that's a good idea? He nodded. People deserve to see what happened. This isn't just about this flight. It happens all the time. But now there's proof. The woman beside him added, this isn't just about one flight attendant. This is about accountability. The mother exhaled slowly, glancing at her husband. He met her gaze and gave a small nod. Maybe they weren't looking for attention, but they couldn't ignore what had happened. If this could prevent another family from going through the same thing, maybe it was worth it. A few rows ahead, the businessman who had questioned the flight attendant earlier turned in his seat. I hope you both know you weren't alone in this, he said. I've sent an official complaint to the airline myself. And I doubt I'm the only one. More murmurs of agreement came from other passengers. A woman near the window added, we all saw it. And we won't forget it. The mother felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. Despite everything, despite the humiliation and stress, there had been kindness too. Strangers standing up, speaking out, refusing to let injustice slide by unnoticed. Minutes later, another announcement came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We will now be resuming our flight. A collective exhale swept through the cabin. The plane began to taxi once more, the hum of the engines filling the space. The mother glanced out the window, watching the unfamiliar airport slowly disappear as they lifted back into the sky. As they settled into the air, a different kind of quiet settled over the cabin. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence from earlier but something lighter, like the air had cleared. Conversations picked up again, but the energy had shifted. The father turned to his wife, his voice lower now. Are you okay? She nodded, though she knew it would take some time for the reality of everything to fully settle. I think so. He squeezed her hand gently. We made it through. She managed a small smile. Yeah, we did. Their daughter had already begun flipping through the pages of her coloring book, her tiny hands moving crayons across the paper. The innocence of it made the mother's heart ache. She wanted to believe that one day, her daughter wouldn't have to witness moments like these, that she wouldn't have to understand the weight of them. Another hour passed before the man with the phone leaned over again, his eyes wide with disbelief. It's blowing up, he whispered. The mother frowned slightly. Already? He turned his phone around to show her. Thousands of comments. Shares climbing by the second. News outlets picking up the story. People were paying attention. The woman beside him shook her head, almost in amazement. This is bigger than just a viral video. People are furious. The mother felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, disbelief, even a small sliver of apprehension. What would come next? Would the airline issue a formal statement? Would there be real change? Or would this just be another fleeting moment on the internet? The father let out a small sigh. We'll deal with whatever comes next, he said. The mother nodded. There was no telling how this would unfold, but one thing was certain, it wouldn't be ignored. By the time the plane finally landed at their original destination, the energy in the cabin had shifted completely. Passengers stretched, gathered their belongings, and prepared to deboard. As the mother stood, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. It was the businessman again. Just so you know, he said, his voice warm, what happened here today, it mattered. She swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. Thank you. As they stepped off the plane and into the terminal, a new kind of exhaustion settled over her. But this time, it wasn't from fear or stress. It was the weight of something bigger, something that had started with a moment of injustice but had grown into something more. The father wrapped an arm around her as they walked toward baggage claim, their daughter skipping slightly ahead, blissfully unaware of the storm they had just weathered. The mother took one last look at her phone. The notifications were still rolling in. The world was watching. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things were about to change.